Former CIA pilot. Others say aliens are among us. From the Las Vegas Sun, May 22nd, 1988. In the cool, dark of an isolated ranch house at the foot of Sunrise Mountain, even the sound of an airplane passing overhead is ominous, an out-of-the-ordinary roaring that only accentuates an out-of-the-ordinary conversation. Part of it is John Lear himself, an unsmiling, humorless man with close-cropped silver hair who seems to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. And perhaps he does, because part of this Twilight Zone conversation is Lear's contention that the United States government is hiding a horrendous secret, an ongoing relationship with aliens from other worlds. When he says, it was without a doubt the biggest cover-up in the history of mankind, it is spoken with the outward calm of a person who senses something dreadful, but is powerless to see it, or stop it, or prove it. But he believes, and that belief is central to his obsession. And it is an obsession. He freely admits that. He also knows that what he says is at times so bizarre it stretches credulity. That's why he spends 4 hours out of a sunny morning holed up in this darkened testimony to the Lear family tradition, talking about it, handing out copies of allegedly highly sensitive documents, playing videotapes of some of the strangest stories in journalism, backing them up with telephone numbers of people he says are like him, bucking the odds to get the rest of the world to take seriously what has been a long-running and worldwide joke. Flying saucers are real, Lear says, and are manned by beings from other star systems. Those same beings have both captured and been captured with the full knowledge of the U.S. government, and that same government is willing to go to any lengths at all, to keep it a secret. Some of what Lear says is parroted in black and white in both general public articles and in both top secret and declassified documents that have been leaked to him, a former CIA employee who flew spook missions over Cambodia when we were not officially there. Some of what he says is his own theory, a theory that in the bright light of day, away from that house and its inherent foreboding, sounds like a Rod Serling script. But his manner, and at least part of his evidence, is compelling. When Lear speaks, he places a demand on the listener to make the distinction between fact and fiction. Aside from photographs and film footage, he says he has never seen a UFO. Aside from artist renditions, he says he has never seen an extraterrestrial. He knows only what those who claim to have seen both have told him, what documents and articles, numerous books, and several news documentaries have disclosed. At the least, it is second-hand information. Some of it is speculation. Some of it is hearsay. And some of it has the official stamp of top secret on it, such as the document headed Briefing Document Operation Majestic 12, prepared for President-elect Dwight D. Eisenhower, eyes only, November 18, 1952. It reads, on July 7, 1947, a secret operation was begun to assure recovery of the wreckage found on a ranch in Roswell, New Mexico, of this object for scientific study. During the course of this operation, aerial reconnaissance discovered that 4 small, human-like beings had apparently ejected from the aircraft at some point before it exploded. Civilian and military witnesses in the area were debriefed, and news reporters were given the effective cover story that the object had been a misguided weather research balloon. The government has always officially denied the existence of Operation Majestic 12, or MAGIC. But an alleged memorandum from then-President Harry Truman dated September 24, 1947, to Secretary of Defense James V. Forrestal acknowledges at least its existence, if not its purpose, with the words, as per our recent conversation on this matter, you are hereby authorized with all due speed and caution upon your undertaking. Hereafter this matter shall be referred to only as Operation Majestic 12. Lear says the organization is still in existence, made an ill-fated deal with the humanoid alien beings, and now includes Vice President George Bush and former National Security Advisor John Poindexter on its roster. All of which, of course, is nigh impossible to prove. A skeptic might argue that it is so much science fiction spun from so many vivid imaginations. At least one of the people Lear gives as reference qualifies all of the statements Lear has attributed to him. Author William Moore says a man who has been in and out of psychiatric wards has disseminated much of the information Lear echoes concerning bizarre underground bases and aliens inhabiting the planet. Moore is the author of the book The Roswell Incident, which traces the New Mexico crash and retrieval that reportedly sparked the creation of MJ-12. He says Lear is correct when he claims Moore has a videotape of a military officer associated with MJ-12 answering questions about the organization's history, the cover-up, the recovery of numerous flying saucers, and the existence of a live alien. He won't talk about that because he's in the middle of giving it to another news source. But he does say, certainly there's a government cover-up. There are pages and pages of UFO material from the National Security Council in which 80% of the content is blacked out. The question is, what are they covering up? Is there any substantial evidence to back Leary's story up? None. There have been people who claim to have seen Christ step out of a spaceship in their backyard. I guess if you believe that, you'll believe anything, Moore adds. Paul Benowitz, who has a history of mental instability according to Moore, has shown him aerial photographs of what he claims is a desert alien base in New Mexico. But, Moore says, there isn't any way of discerning what it is. What he sees as a base with spaceships and aliens on the ground looks like sticks and rocks. Frankly, not one person who looks at the photos can see the base, aliens, and spaceships. What look like alien spaceships to him looks like craggy shale coming out of the ground to me. Lear admits his belief that the operation of a joint CIA alien underground base in New Mexico in which cloning and genetic experiments are being conducted on unwilling human guinea pigs is speculation. But he believes this for several reasons. He says papers describing events at the base were given to him by a CIA agent who worked in the facility. He says he talked to a woman who was abducted for unknown reasons and witnessed the experiments. He says he is associated with a man whose son worked as a laboratory assistant at the base and helped the aliens and the CIA perform the experiments. Also, this theory is Lear's belief that the aliens will radically alter the world's religious beliefs. He says he has seen a videotape which has a U.S. government representative saying the aliens created Jesus Christ and manipulated human genetic development. Right now, I'm beginning to think they're lying because they're so deceptive, Lear says. It's probably not true, but they're saying it. Since the world is held together by religious experiences and belief, he says, the aliens are attacking that fabric in an attempt to gain the upper hand in a hostile takeover of the planet. That, too, is conjecture. At least 25 abductees have said something is going to happen within the year, Lear says. One abductee, he says, pinpointed a date of May 16th. Government informants say there's a tremendous feeling of foreboding. May 16th has come and gone. Lear stands with his story, reiterating that what he wrote in a 7-page statement issued last December. Lear says the United States government has covered up its relationship with alien beings for more than 20 years and its involvement with UFOs in general for more than 40. In the beginning, he theorizes it was to prevent a mass panic equivalent to the one generated by Orson Welles' 1938 radio broadcast War of the Worlds. In 1988, however, Lear says the aliens have given the government far more threatening reasons to suppress information. In what he describes as the horrible truth, Lear claims the government sold us to the aliens, unwittingly but irretrievably. Between 1969 and 1971, Lear says Majestic 12 made a deal with advanced alien beings called EBEs, extraterrestrial biological entities. The deal was this. The EBEs, also called the Greys because of their coloring, would give the U.S. information that would enable us to surpass the Soviet Union technologically. In turn, MJ-12 would ignore the Greys' abductions of humans for study and suppress information on the widespread cattle mutilations, the aliens' source of food. although they would provide both MJ-12 and the National Security Council with a list of those abductees. But the Greys lied, said Lear. They were abducting far more people than they admitted to, and for far more ominous reasons. According to Lear, whose scenario is backed up at least in part by a former U.S. military intelligence officer, some of the purposes for the abduction were to biologically monitor, track, and control the subject by inserting a 3mm device through the nasal cavity into the brain. Lear says the aliens can and do track humans even after the device is removed. To implement a post-hypnotic suggestions to carry out a specific, perhaps cataclysmic activity during a certain time period within the following 2 to 5 years. The best scientific minds, he says, have been unable to determine the nature of that activity. To kill some subjects so they could function as sources for biological material and substances, specifically food. To kill some individuals whom the Greys felt represented a threat to the continuation of their activity. To effect genetic engineering experiments. To impregnate human females and terminate pregnancies early to secure a crossbred infant. In what he calls the Grand Deception, Lear says the Greys double-crossed the United States because they made the same technology for abductions deal with the Soviet Union. Now, he says, both countries have combined their top scientific minds to create a weapon in an effort to combat the Greys. The first weapon, he claims, failed earlier this year. That weapon was built partly as a reaction to an altercation with the Greys at what Lear calls a jointly occupied CIA alien underground facility in Dulce, New Mexico. Lear says that in 1979, a special armed forces unit attempted to free a number of American abductees trapped in the facility. Lear names no names from where this information was retrieved, only vagaries. On the rescue attempt, according to one source, 66 of the soldiers were killed and people were not freed. On the underground laboratory, this jointly occupied CIA alien facility has been described as enormous, with huge tiled walls that go on forever. Witnesses have reported huge vats filled with amber liquid and parts of human bodies being stirred inside. We've united with the Russians for the common goal of trying to save ourselves from the Greys, Lear says. And he claims the Russian scientists' visit to the Nevada test site wasn't to monitor underground nuclear tests at all, but to work with American scientists on the new weapon, a weapon Lear says won't be available for at least 2 years. They, the Greys, have used humans for food, Lear says. That's part of the reason for the cover-up. The government thinks the cover-up must be kept, even with the use of deadly force. According to Lear, the Greys have infested the planet. There's a rumor that 600 are up at the test site. Officials at the test site call the claim nonsense. I can assert, said Public Information Officer Karen Randolph, that there are no aliens alive or dead at the test site. That's just not true. Lear says the aliens come from Zeta Reticulum, a binary star system 38 light-years from Earth. He theorizes that the Greys are using the hormones and enzymes of humans and cattle for food because a genetic disorder in their digestive system has caused it to atrophy and dysfunction. In order to sustain themselves, Lear wrote in his statement, they use an enzyme or hormonal secretion obtained from the tissue that they extract from humans and animals. The secretions are then mixed with hydrogen peroxide and applied on the skin by spreading or dipping parts of their bodies in the solution. The body absorbs the solution, then excretes the waste back through the skin. Robert Pippin, project manager for the planetarium at Clark County Community College, points out that Zeta Reticulum is actually 130 light-years from Earth, not 38, and it would take even the fastest Voyager millions of miles to make the trip to Earth unless it was traveling at least close to the speed of light. That is not impossible in theory, he says, but if they were in fact capable of that, they would certainly have no need to be surreptitious. The biology doesn't make sense to me, but if they can travel like that, then they can manipulate matter, and they certainly don't have to come as humans. But why would they travel literally trillions of miles to eat our cattle? It's very unlikely there are monsters out there doing it. Then who is doing it? The cattle mutilations that Lear claims feed the aliens have plagued law enforcement officials in every state west of the Mississippi since 1947, including Nevada's Humboldt County. A documentary produced by Linda Howe called Strange Harvest concludes that nothing known to man is responsible for the bloodless, trackless, mutilated carcasses, but a sheriff in Humboldt County and the director of the Colorado Bureau of Investigation both dispute that. "We have no mutilated cows or flying saucers up here," Humboldt County Sheriff James Bagwell said in a telephone interview. And while he does not argue that bodies of cows and bulls have turned up in his territory, he says every single one has had a plausible explanation behind it. This is harsh country. Ranchers can expect to lose 2 to 3% of their range cattle every year. Sometimes it's inclement weather. Sometimes a heifer having her first calf will die, unable to pass the calf. Or they'll fall and break a leg. Cattle rustlers, passed on to legend in most states, still work their trade around Humboldt County, and Bagwell believes the remains left behind after the rustlers take off with the backbone and hindquarters can feed an overactive imagination. When a cow dies, it's the soft body tissue that is first attacked, he says. Eyes, lips, anus, and if a small animal like a rodent goes after it, it would appear that it has been cut with a knife and there will be no tracks. Since he took office in January 1983, there has not been one case of unexplainable mutilation, nor have any carcasses been found totally drained of blood. Occasional reports of helicopters, such as have been seen around other mutilation sites in other states, turn out to be military aircraft. The area around Winnemucca is on the route for testing. Sometimes they come at night, and of course that causes concern. No mystery there, Bagwell says. And in fact, the mystery is not a mystery at all, according to Carl Whiteside, director of the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, but only a colorful ruse concocted by 2 Joliet State prison inmates looking for something to get them into a less secure halfway house and consequent escape. Whiteside doesn't deny that there have been cattle deaths. 206 were reported and investigated by the CBI between 1976 and 1977, when the probe was officially closed. But out of those 206, 203 had plausible explanations, Whiteside says, and the remaining 3 he puts down to pranksters. The Joliet inmates' bizarre story of monsters and saucers was fueled by the press and by special interest groups looking for something to hook into. He calls Howe's documentary grossly jaded to support her position. We have never uncovered anything to support a theory of flying saucers. Alleged mutilations have been attributed to predator attacks, and no corpse was ever found, at least by the CBI, drained of blood. Whiteside further says that conclusion was also the conclusion of officials with the Department of the Interior who examined hair and shoe marks on the carcasses. But both Bagwell's and Whiteside's conclusions are 180 degrees from those formed by another, a 27-year veteran of law enforcement now serving as sheriff of San Animas County, Colorado. Sheriff Lou Giordo, formerly chief investigator for the district attorney's office in Trinidad, Colorado, has been looking at those carcasses for 12 years, mutilated, drained of blood, with no other signs of blood on the ground or in the surrounding area, and no tracks leading to or from the corpses. I can tell you what they aren't, he says. I was born and raised on a ranch, and I know what kills cattle. I know lightning and poison and falls and predators and disease, and none of these are responsible for what has happened out here. We examined the cult theory, the possibility of the military doing something out here, and none of them stand up. So I can tell you what they aren't. You tell me what they are. The last case officially reported was 2 years ago, although Giordo knows from his connection with ranchers that they are still continuing. One estimate puts the number that have actually occurred nationwide since 1974 at a conservative 5,000. On Giordo's last case, he took a veterinarian with him, and a Geiger counter, since large, unblinking lights had been reported hovering in the night sky shortly before the cow's body was found. The radioactivity level was nothing to be alarmed about, he says, but the cow's body was. Unlike others that have had various organs apparently surgically removed with no other obvious cause of death, this one was intact but with every single bone in its body broken and rub or rope burn marks between its horns. I asked the vet what had happened to that animal. He said it had been beaten with a sledgehammer and then dragged into the pasture. I said, okay, I'll make a circle and you show me even one area where the earth had been disturbed. He couldn't. He finally agreed with me that the cow had been dropped, hit the ground, and bounced. The next day, Giordo asked a sheriff's deputy to spend an evening out by that pasture and report back to him any unusual activity. He called me and said that at 9 p.m. he saw a bright light streak out of the north, illuminate that pasture, and then take off south. Giordo said when he stands at a crime scene, he asks himself the basic questions: who, what, why, where, and how? Why is this cow, a healthy animal that means $300 to its owner, lying here? I always tell my investigators that if they take the time to look and listen, a crime scene will talk back to them. But I've been at this for 12 years, and this is nothing we can explain. He scoffs at one claim that the attacks, including one case where the hind and back quarters had been rolled up like a newspaper, 1/3 the way up the animal's back, are the results of coyotes. If there's a coyote out there that can cut like that, I want a machine gun. But on the whole, author Moore doesn't put much stock in Lear's theories of female impregnation and bases in cattle-eating humanoids. I think, he says, Mr. Lear has talked to a lot of people, but he doesn't have a lot of evidence. It has been gleaned from this source and that source, but he has no proof. It is strictly his position. He hasn't conducted any substantial research. Lear's obsession dates back 13 months when he had a discussion with Air Force personnel who had witnessed a closely documented UFO report coming out of Bentwaters, a United States Air Force base north of London, in 1980. The case was reported in detail on cable news network, which played back a tape made at the time of the incident, capturing both the excitement and apparent fear of the men moving into the woods between RAF Woodbridge and Bentwaters tracking unusual lights. Whether or not alien beings were seen then is still debated, but a memorandum from Lieutenant Colonel Charles I. Halt, Deputy Base Commander at Bentwaters, to Combat Support Group Headquarters in New York confirmed the sightings of blinking, metallic lights that left 3 depressions in the ground. That discussion inspired Lear to compile volumes of information on UFOs from numerous sources. That leaves Moore skeptical. It's the product of a few weeks of research, he says. Lear has lent his own personal reputation and name to make a story out of something that isn't a story. I think he's jumping the gun. He's like a bull in a china shop. Moore's tape was to be released publicly later in 1987 as part of the government's plan to release UFO information to the public. When the first weapon employed against the Greys failed, however, Lear says, the government decided to wait until sometime in 1988 to avoid a panic. He says journalist Paul Harvey viewed the tape but declined to mention it on his radio show. Lear also claims that Moore was invited to Washington, D.C. to film an EBE in an interview for a public distribution, but the idea was shelved after the stock market crash in October. Moore denies that and dismisses Lear's allegation that he is not a UFO researcher at all, but a government agent with close ties to MJ-12. I have no idea where he got that information. I've been actively involved with UFOs for over 25 years. I'm one of the few people in the country who is a ufologist. I disseminate information that is strongly evidence-oriented. I don't believe everything everybody tells me. I let the evidence speak for itself. Where is his evidence? Lear says there are 3 living aliens that have been captured and codenamed EBE-1, 2, and 3. He says are being held at an electromagnetic facility called YY-2 at the Air Force Base in Los Alamos, New Mexico. They communicate through telepathy, he says. They are advanced to us by more than 1 million years. They can move by thought and disappear. When they did a display for President Dwight Eisenhower at Edwards Air Force Base, he said, the public is not ready for this. President Reagan is aware of the EBEs, Lear says, and has intimated as much when he said in a speech concerning a meeting with Soviet Premier Mikhail Gorbachev, "I couldn't help but say to him, just think how easy his task and mine might be in these meetings that we held if suddenly there was a threat to this world from some other species from another planet outside in the universe. We'd forget all the little local differences that we have between our countries, and we would find out once and for all that we really are all human beings here on this earth together." Was he talking about the future? Not according to John Lear. He was talking about the here and now.